My question to you is, what exactly do you know about graffiti? What is the history you've been told? We're going to take a journey where we're going to examine this.
Good shot, kid. You got him.
Graffiti has been around in all different parts of the world in one form or another, whether it was, you want to consider the cave paintings in Lascaux on down. People, by the time they had walls, they were writing on them. Early in the United States, beginning really in the antebellum years, people began to write on boxcars and that would roll from coast to coast. In the hobo years of the Depression, that became even more prominent. There was always gang graffiti dating back to the 30s and 20s in Los Angeles and other parts of California and the Southwest. There was name-based graffiti all over the place. There was Kilroy was here, which actually sprung out of a suburb of Boston, oddly enough, until it became this kind of global icon for the greatest generation. But when this odd combination of name and fame came together in the late 1960s in both Philadelphia and New York, it really exploded. And what was so magical and so important in the history of American graffiti were the years really 1971 to 1975 in New York. And what happened was a generation of kids, and it's really important to remember that these were kids. There was almost nobody over the age of 19 involved in this. Developed a whole art form that went from a simple signature, just Joe was here kind of thing, all the way up to a mural that covered the entire side of a subway car. And this was something that had just never been seen in our history before, an entire movement just completely developed by kids.
Graffiti art is bigger than it's ever been. It keeps getting bigger, no matter what rules and laws the cities create. There'll always be the next batch of young kids that just want to go out and write on things.
We all who have that inner kid in us still can retain that appeal of what graffiti is, this just amazing amount of line and color that is in a public space. And then just the whole, how did they do that kind of factor. Graffiti is the rock and roll of visual art. It came from America and it spread throughout the world. It took over the world. There have been very few American art forms that have lasted as long as graffiti, whether you're talking abstract expressionism or anything. The heyday of those periods was really maybe a decade at best in some cases. Graffiti keeps going after 40 years, and now that there's a public interest in graffiti, you have to capture that moment as historians.
I realized there really was no book that really told me what the history of Pittsburgh was, that told me what the history of Oregon was, what the history of Boston was. You know, there were little bits and pieces out there, but it wasn't there. And so many of these people are disappearing, dying, photos are disappearing, you know, getting trashed. And it was time, while graffiti in a way is so hot right now and so popular, to start digging all these people up from all these scenes and really tell the story.
When we started to make the history of American graffiti, we wanted to highlight all of the entire picture of it. A lot of the books had come out and they had taken a small bite of this. So we decided to basically swing as hard as we could and do what we could. And just that was a tough thing to do, of course, but it involved finding hundreds of people and getting them to get their old shoeboxes down, all these old photographs. And you have to remember, in early years of graffiti, adults were not taking pictures of this stuff. They were removing it.
Everyone will tell you a different answer to if their goal of writing graffiti is to become famous and go into a gallery, or if their goal is just to write their name as many places as they can and get better at it and, you know, paint more trains, paint more walls, paint more freeway signs. You know, everyone has a different reason. Graffiti's real explosion into the gallery and art world started in New York in the early 80s. And it was the cool new thing to buy. That whole movement definitely was the real early gallery movement where graffiti artists were able to transfer their works into the gallery and make a living from it, and some of them still are. Graffiti at its purest, at its rawest, at its best, and the true definition of graffiti is illegal. Illegal art on a wall, for me, that's what it means. It works best on the street, it works best under a bridge, it works best on a train rolling by you, and that's what it is. It's great that so much of it's been documented, and you can show its historical relevance through different cities and different movements, but bringing it into galleries and museums is hard to do. But there's several artists, dozens, hundreds, probably thousands, that have made the transformation from things they've learned on the street and been able to bring it into galleries and into museums and still make their work as exciting, if not more exciting, than it was on the street, because of the extended mediums they have to work in and the time they have to do it.
For artists that work both indoors and outdoors as they grow older, whether it's in galleries or museums, there's always there is a difference, of course, but it's a question of audience. It's a change in audience. And then the other thing is that working indoors, there's some good things to that. You can do things like make more money. You can do things like not have to have your stuff be taken down by weather or the elements or, a vigilant graffiti buff. So there's pluses and minuses. You get to spend more time on it. You get to work on projects you couldn't do out in the street. So they're basically just two different creatures. But the thing is that graffiti tends to attract some incredibly talented people who have incredibly big ambitions. You can't just go in and think you're going to do a little bit. If you have to go all hog. And the people who go into graffiti and they want to go inside, they tend to have good ideas on the inside as well, and very big ambitions.
If you're a really good graffiti artist, you're going to work with your setting. You're going to look at the city differently. You're going to see a rooftop. You're going to see a spot someone else might not have seen, and you're going to work with the city. So if you're really good at that and really good at choosing your color palettes and making that work, there's a good chance you're going to become a better artist at the same time, because you're going to have the same train of thought when you're working in the studio.
It's always hard to get kids or young people at all, or just anybody, into museums, into galleries. It's hard to get people through the door. That's the constant challenge. And then once you have them there, you have to present them with something that is, that is going to captivate them. And that's hard. Now, it's also very hard to get your name 40 feet tall or 40 feet long on the side of a bridge abutment while a train whizzes by. But a lot of people see that. And it's a funny little fact, it's a funny little inconvenient truth of museums that the front of them, the facade of the museum will always be seen by more people than the inside and the art within. And graffiti writers, well, they're not dumb, they recognize that. And they work in public spaces because they can be seen there.
So, at one point in time, brother, I believed that I was part Indian. That is what was always taught to me. Part. But as the more and more I do my research, I'm starting to find out that we might be people who look like us, the whole Indian. Now, this is a new concept. I know that this is the same for you as it is for me. But I'm starting to wrap my head around the idea of this. I want to tell you a tale.
In 1978, a movie was created by a director of the name of Sidney Lumet. The name of this movie is called The Wiz. Now, The Wiz, for a lot of people, is basically the black version of The Wizard of Oz. But in this movie, there are people who their whole world is based upon paint, graffiti. And when you look at these people, look at what these people look like. Okay? Now, we would have to be foolish to deny that graffiti and what we know as the African American are indistinguishably inseparable. Okay? I say all that to say this. How many of y'all have ever heard of the rainbow eucalyptus? Now, when I saw this plant, there was something that compelled me in my soul where I just said, this is it right here. This is a missing part to the equation of what we are now understanding to be the indigenous people, because this art form originated here in America. The earliest forms of it goes back to the pyramids, into the tombs, and to the cave walls. Okay? And when you see who are the people who perpetuate this art form, you then start to get a perspective. As I was saying about the rainbow eucalyptus, look at the coloration of this plant. Look at it. And you tell me that this art form, this graffiti, it isn't coming from some sort of muscle memory of something we may have saw or we have seen in the past. And that's where I'm drawing this connection, because graffiti seems to have just come out of nowhere, or did it? Like I said, is this some sort of muscle memory of us remembering our past? And you hear a lot of people saying that they are aboriginals, or they are people who came from or migrated from the Southeastern Asian area into America. Okay? Well, when you do the research on where this plant comes from, it originally grows in these areas. And I just said, by God, there has to be a connection there. There has to be. I just want y'all to think about it. I love all of y'all. In the words of my elder, I love all of y'all, even the ones who make it hard for you to love. In our language, there is no way to say goodbye. So I'm going to say, Uske, Deja Dalke, say you lust tea. What else?